I'm going to introduce Bruce. We're going to do something a little bit different tonight, which I'll tell you about in the introduction, and then we'll get started. So Bruce Jackson, for those that don't already know him, is an American writer, folklorist, documentary filmmaker, and photographer. His most recent book, Places, Things Heard, Things Seen, has been described as an alt-left history of American culture since the 1950s. Bruce attributes his passion for creativity to his own curiosity and his commitment to follow that curiosity wherever it takes him. From the Resurrection City encampment in Washington, D.C. in the 60s to photographing and recording in Texas and Arkansas prisons, and recently collaborating on a play with the Worcester Group Experimental Theater Company in New York City, Bruce Jackson's matchless variousness, that was not my term, but I love it so much, matchless variousness bears witness to truth with unflinching honesty and exceptional empathy. For those that don't know, Bruce is the SUNY Distinguished Professor and James Agee Professor of American Culture at University of Buffalo. He is author and editor of 40 books, hard to believe, among which are Wake Up Dead Men, Afro-American Work Songs from Texas Prisons, Get Your Ass in the Water and Swim Like Me, Narrative Poetry from Black Oral Tradition, The Story is True, The Art and Meaning of Telling Stories, and Inside the Wire, Photographs from Texas and Arkansas Prisons. His photographs have been widely exhibited, and in 2017, New York celebrated experimental theater company, the Worcester Group, premiered a play based on his recordings of African-American folklore in Texas prison, The B-Side. New York Times theater critic Ben Brantley named it one of the year's 10 best New York theater presentations. So also, if that isn't enough amazingness, in collaboration with SUNY Distinguished Teaching Professor Diane Christian, he has directed and produced they have directed and produced 5 documentary films and written 3 books. One of my favorite of those collaborations is the book I Look at Diane Christian Looks at Me. It's a beautiful and intimate book that chronicles their 46-year relationship. Am I getting those numbers right? I think I did the math today. 45.
we met in 1970.
Okay.
So it goes back to, so it's coming on, it's 50 years.
Wow. So today I received a copy of that book, which yesterday I was so excited about. And inscribed in that book was this message: seeing things takes time. And we had an idea about what we were going to do tonight, and we were going to do this retrospective look at Bruce's work. And that message inspired us to slow down, to make sure we take plenty of time in this process. And so we decided to split this talk into 2 parts. So this week, we're going to do a retrospective tour of this amazing different projects that Bruce has worked on. And then next week, we're actually going to meet back same day, same time. And we will be actually joined by Diane Christian, and they're going to talk about their collaboration together, and we're going to get to ask all the questions we want to know about how people can work out an amazing collaboration over that long a time, which I'm super excited about. And so without further ado, I'm super excited to introduce Bruce Jackson.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. So what should we do?
So I would love to talk to you first about the Texas prison work, because I feel like if I understand that right, it is your beginnings as a photographer, but was never intended to be a photography project.
Right.
And I would love to hear that story, and also would love to know what you discovered about photography in that process, and why you have continued to actually practice that medium for as long as you have.
But I'll answer that question. And what I'd like to do, if it's okay with everybody, is I'll answer that. And then I'd like to run through just a whole bunch of photographs really quickly. And then we can talk about whatever anybody wants to talk about. Would that work?
Sounds perfect.
I first went to the Texas prisons in July 1964. And my concern was, what I was interested in was Black convict work songs. And I was recording them, and I was taking photographs as, hi, Kate. I was taking photographs as an aide-memoire, simply as notes, because I knew when I got back and started writing about this stuff in whatever form it would take, and at that point I didn't know what form it would take. There's no way I could take as many notes as I could get with pictures. I didn't know anything about taking pictures, but I just started taking them. And so that work resulted in some recordings, which we'll get back to, because Kate Volk, who's just joined us, is the director of the Worcester Group play based on the recordings I did that summer in 1964. So we're basically talking about a piece of work that spans a 50-year time period that has come absolutely into the present because of the Worcester Group. So I did the recordings. It resulted in some LPs, then subsequently CDs, and the book you mentioned, Wake Up Dead Man, which is about the work songs, and resulted in several other books, because my work has always been broader than any one thing. I always just, when I was out there, I just kept the recorder going all the time, and so it turned into a number of books on crime, on prison life, and on all kinds of stuff. In the course of it, I kept taking pictures, and often doing it badly. I have an astonishing number of really, really awful pictures of things that are badly developed, badly focused, badly held. But I took so many that there are enough good ones that I'll have some pictures to show you tonight that I think you'll like. Over time, a few years later, a warden I knew in Texas became commissioner of the Arkansas prison system. And Arkansas was the first prison in the US declared unconstitutional by a federal court. And I thought it would be interesting to do an article for Harper's or the New York Times Magazine, for which I was then writing. Oh, shut up, dog. Which I was then writing about this place. So I stopped by there on my way to California to, excuse me. I stopped by there, and to observe the place for a week, I took some photographs. I didn't get enough to do the article I wanted, so I stopped by the next year on my way back, and I took more photographs, and I realized in the course of it that the story I wanted to tell was a story not in which pictures supported the words, but in which words supported the pictures. That I really wanted to show that world and have the words tell you what you were seeing. And that resulted in my first photograph book, Killing Time, which came out in 1977. And then I thought I was through with prison stuff. And in 1978, I was asked to be a witness in a case in federal court in Houston. And I said I would do it. It was a civil rights case. I said I'd do it if I could visit all the prisons in Texas. At that time, Texas only had 13 prisons. Now it has 168. Yes. And so I visited all the prisons except one. And again, I took pictures basically as aides memoir, as notes. While there, I visited death row for the first time, which I'd never done before. And I realized it should be a movie. So Diane Christian and I went down the next year, and we shot a film on death row about men waiting to be executed, and we did a book about it. And I took pictures while, not to take photographs, but while we weren't doing anything else. And again, to document it. And those became photographs. So many of the photographs I'll show you tonight are photographs that occurred in the course of me really doing something else. There are a few things that were specific photograph projects, but not many. But I think it was in the course of the Arkansas work that I first started thinking of photography seriously as doing something, as seeing the world photographically, rather than using photographs to support what I was doing in words. But I think basically for me, and I was thinking about this today, Susan, because you asked me to do this, photographs for me are very much like words. My interest is not in making photographs. My interest is in looking at something or taking part in something and using words and photographs to tell other people about it subsequently. Is that it?
Yes, if you just want to do a screen share, we can
Yeah.
start. We can
So
start looking through.
do screen share, and I'll show you a whole bunch of stuff, and they're gonna go by very fast. It's gonna be a lot of pictures, and as I said, the first part will be the prison stuff, and then I'll talk about technology a bit, and then I'll show you some other things, including some people who are on camera here right now. Okay. Okay, can you all see that? Everybody see that? Okay, these are some of the first pictures I took in Texas. Let's see. As I said, I was interested in the convict work songs. You see there were 4 men working around a tree. What the songs did was they let them keep their axes in the right position so they didn't hurt each other when they were coming in. These are some of the guys listening to the recordings I made in those first trips. That white guy in the middle of that picture is me. That's in 1965. This picture, I'm on a horse. I wanted to see what the world looked like from the guard's point of view. This is from Arkansas, and this is about the time I started getting interested and realizing that there was a kind of formal way to look at this world that made what I was looking at more powerful. Something about my point of view in photography that I think is critical. I never get on the ground to shoot. I never stand on a chair to shoot. I want my photographs to show what I was seeing when I was there. So everything I do is at eye level. I didn't realize I was doing this for years. It's only later when I looked at them that I realized that that's what I was up to. But you can see from the eye contact here where I am. This is an archetypal picture for me of the penitentiary. Your body's not your own in the penitentiary. People can always come and touch you, pat you down. There's a guy in the front holding onto his cards as if he's going to lose them. The other guy with his hands in his pockets, the convict in that crucifixion position. These guys loved their guns. They were always playing with their guns. You see them taking them in and out of the holster. This guy came up to me one day with a snake. I said, "Get that away from me." He said, "I'm just showing it to you." This is another one of the ones where I looked at it and I realized there was this absolutely beautiful, these lines were gorgeous. And you don't want to aestheticize horror, but it's hard not to. This is one of those pictures that articulates the power of the penitentiary. The guy with his arm akimbo with a cigarette dangling out of his mouth, the other guy with his sunglasses on a horse looking down. These guys coming in from the field. Texas, they come in, everybody strips. The guards keep their clothes on. If you've ever been in a situation where you're naked and everybody else is dressed, or the reverse, you know about the power of who gets to keep clothes on. This is one of my favorites because the shadows of the bars, in a way, map themselves on that man's body in the bed. And just the very light tells you what the situation is. And this is about the paucity of physical space anyone has. Prison, you have no personal space. There's no, it's part of what's horrible about it. You can't get away from anyone. This is a photograph I will come back to later. Remember this man's face. He looks like someone whose work many of you have read, and you will see that person later. This guy played this harmonica. He wore that jacket a shirt, a sweater, a sweatshirt, the rosary. Every day of the year, I saw him in spring, summer, winter, and fall. And he had the hat on, and he had that log duplex slide rule in his pocket. And I said, "What's with the slide rule?" He said, "Without the slide rule, I couldn't design helicopters." This locker box, Walker Evans looked at this photo and said, "Did many of them make photos like that? Make locker boxes like that?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Did you take pictures of them?" I said, "Yeah, I took several." And he said, "I would have taken them all." And I immediately felt like I'd flunked a class. There's a recent very good book came out from Harvard about prison art, but some of the best prison art I saw was literally on people's bodies. And in a way, some of their bodies were a kind of record of their lives, of where they'd been. This is another one with the shadows, not tattooed, but marking the guy's body. This is a painting of the biblical flood. I asked the guy, I said, "What is this?" The lower painting is something a lot of prisoners would do who did art. They would get a little picture, a school picture from somebody, and make a bigger painting of it and trade it for cigarettes or whatever. But this larger painting, I said, "What is that?" He said, "The flood." I said, "What flood?" He said, "You know what flood? The Bible." I said, "Where's the ark?" And in the upper corner at about 11 o'clock, you see that little spot of light? That's the ark. He painted the biblical flood from the point of view of the people left behind, of the people who were drowning. This guy was showing me cotton seeds. He just loved it. He loved the cotton. Oh, shut up. Could you get him out? Get her out of here. You saw this guy before. He was one of the three. They weren't allowed to tape anything to the wall. Prison's a place where people get very creative with physical things because they have very little. Since they couldn't tape anything, what he did was he would unloosen an electrical plate. You can see those three electrical plates to the left and right of him. And he would put a picture in it, screw it back in, that held up the picture, and then he would scotch tape the others. So he was surrounded by centerfolds. This is a new guy. You can see he's been out in the field working with a hoe. You can see what it did to his hands, the burst blisters. This guy, I look at him, and this could have been a photograph from a concentration camp. This is a wide lux photo. A wide lux is a camera. I don't know if you can see it. This is a wide lux. And instead of a wide angle lens, I'm going to put this right up to this thing. It'll work. Oh, here we are. I don't know if you can see it. A shutter moves so that instead of a spread out lens, the lens is literally moving across the plane of the image. So things, except for horizontal lines, aren't distorted. It's not like being in a fun house. So here you see this wide range of images, and it lets you see far more than you can see. This is wider than a normal field of vision that's in focus. These are those three guys you saw before with no shirts on. To the left of them, there are some people looking at me. To the right of them, there are some people looking at me, none of whom I noticed. Beyond them, to the right, are people who are paying no attention to any of us. So what I like about it is it gives us a sense of it gives me a sense of where I was and what was going on around me. This is death row. The TV sets were all tacked to the wall. This is a barber chair. People would see that barber chair when they came in. Some of them would faint because they thought it was the electric chair, even though they knew it wasn't. All three of the guys in this picture are dead now. They were all executed. Now, those of you, well, you know where that volleyball came next. I got the shot, but a second later, I got the volleyball. This picture I love. They had this small recreation yard they could go to for just a few minutes each week. Three of them have their feet entirely off the ground. It's like they are just momentarily being free. In this volleyball game, if your hand touched the top of the wire or the board, or the ball did, you lost the point. This guy said to me, one good thing about the death penalty is I have some talent in art. He was subsequently executed. This is Kerry Max Cook. He's one of the people in the play The Exonerated, and it was a play and a movie. Kerry got out after over 20 years. He was cleared by DNA evidence. He's still not received a penny of compensation. We correspond by email regularly. I hear from him now. They would get their food slid to them. This guy did cartoons of horses. Billy Hughes, he's dead too. Paul Rougeau, he's dead too. XL White, Sinister Eye, he's dead too. This guy's alive. He got commuted to life. First day I was there, he sent me a note saying it is imperative we talk. And he signed his name, and under it he put fantastic dancer of the mind. I never saw him not moving. Our death row films, and it ends with him doing what I thought was a psychotic rant. Diane thought it was poetry. We were both right, but it stays absolutely current. I said before, they make use of everything you can see. This is all cigarette packs and tobacco wrappers. And they make frames, they make little boxes and everything. Death row, they're locked up all the time, so they use mirrors to see. And hands come out almost as if getting part of their body outside the cell gives them momentary freedom. This is my favorite photograph from death row. Two guys in adjoining cells who cannot see one another, playing dominoes. Rem Koolhaas used this in the Venice Biennale a few years ago. In a way, it sort of gets the spirit of that place. Now I want to talk a few minutes about some technical things. Going digital, I mentioned before that I didn't know what I was doing a lot of the time and I made a lot of mistakes. Digital has saved me from a lot of those mistakes. This, for those of you who have worked in film, those red circles are the result of negative being developed and me not knocking the film can to knock air bubbles off the film surface. So when it dried as those dark circles. Working in the wet room, in the dark room days, there was nothing I could do with that. But working digitally, gone. In a few minutes, gone. This is a negative. It was the first time I was using the wide lux. The exposure is way off. And you can see some of those dots in there, those air dots. It was the same thing. And this was a batch of 6 rolls of film that I screwed up. But exposure's gone and the dots are gone. So digital saved those. Something else that happened, when I started, I couldn't do work with color in the dark room. I mean, it's just, there's no way to do it at home. And doing it with a little lab, I didn't like. I've always done my own printing. And nobody would publish it anyway. It was too expensive. But that's changed in recent years. So pictures like this, I've previously published in black and white, but that's what it looks like in color. And this is in color. This has been published in black and white, color. Shoes, you know, everybody who's looked at Van Gogh does a shoes photo. That's my shoes photo, but very different in color. And these are some more. This one is, the colors are very hot. The New Yorker did this and they did it, so I left it the way they did it. I like the geometry of it. There's a book of the color photographs that's scheduled to come out from Twin Palms in December. And I think it's the first time there are any color photographs from these southern prisons being published. And as I said, it's something that couldn't have been published years ago, and I couldn't have edited. This picture, every time I look at it, I think of Bob Dylan's Mr. Tambourine Man. That guy in the far back just leaping up with, I don't know what he's doing, but it just has a feeling of joy. Remember what I said before about naked. This picture, for the last year, someone's been helping me with scanning. I've got thousands of unscanned negatives, and we found a number of boxes one of which was from the Arkansas prison, which I'd never seen before. And this one is a picture that I found only recently, and I really love it. I love the three bags. I love the arc formed by the bodies going over and coming down. And again, it's a picture I couldn't have done anything with several years ago. Something else I couldn't have done anything with. The last time I was at the Arkansas prison, the convict, the guy who did the mugshots invited me in. They opened a drawer, and it was full of mugshots. And they're little. They're about the size of this card I'm holding up. And he said, "Help yourself, take them." So I filled my pockets till a guard came in, and I stopped. I should have kept on. And I got a few hundred of them. And I always wanted to clean them up a bit, because some of them had been the age had been too cruel to them. And I wanted to print them bigger, because a mugshot is meant to go into a dossier. A dossier, as my friend Michel Foucault would point out, is meant to make you a bureaucratic object and not a human being. And I wanted to let them out of the bureaucratic structure of being human beings. But in the wet room days, there was no way I could do it, and I couldn't afford to do it at a lab. Once I started working digitally, I could both get rid of some of bring back some of the original light, not all of it, like her. And what I left with these, and I printed them, I think 13 by 19, and up close, it's almost the size of a human head from about that far away. I left in them the clutter of age, like those lines adjacent to her head and the mark on her forehead. The paper clips holding this guy here. I left that because these photographs aren't just photographs of people as if they would be on a negative roll, but they're also physical objects that have their own trajectory in time. They have their own historical reality. And I wanted my renditions of them to maintain that as much as possible. And these came out as a book called Pictures from a Drawer from Temple. And unfortunately, they did it as a two-tone book. So all the pictures were black. If they'd gone one color more, they could have maintained this color, which I find important. Now, look at her jacket. The sleeve is torn. It gives you, an idea of the kind of, it tells you something about the world in which she was living. And there's also the rust from a paper clip on the lower left. Somebody corrected the number on his sign. This guy reminds me of Paul Newman grown old. Now, I said before that the 1964 work came full circle with the work of the Worcester Group. Eric Berriman here called me about 4 years ago and said he and Kate Volk had been talking about doing a play. Would I be interested in helping them? And as it turned out, Diane and I spent a lot of time going to performances, going to rehearsals, and hanging out with them. And I'm working on a book now, Kate, I don't think I've told you this, called On the B-Side with the Worcester Group, using some of these photographs. So these are some of the photographs from the play. And the idea of something over that arc of time, finding currency in our present world. This is Kate and Elizabeth Lecomte, who's the guiding genius of the company, Kate with Eric. One thing I forgot to mention, which is very important, many of the prisons I visited were themselves built on the physical locations of what had been slavery time plantations. The culture of prison agriculture in the South in the years I worked was the same as the 19th century plantation. Those songs, some of them had been used in 19th century plantations. The nature of the songs goes back to African tradition. So what the Worcesters have done, bringing it into the most modern kind of theater there is, here's some of the oldest music we have in the country being given absolute currency. And now, so, you know, for me, it is an incredible joy to be part of this. It's Kate and Liz. There's me in the mirror. I think this is when we were in Philadelphia. This is at their place in New York, the Performing Garage. This was a rehearsal the night before opening night in New York. There'd been 8 pre-performances earlier. That night, Kate came up with a suggestion to change the opening 4 minutes of the show. She said to Eric, you said something when we were in Korea, I think it was, or maybe it was Taiwan, and it's really good, one of the talkbacks. She handed it to him, he read it, he did it the next night perfectly, and it's been in the show ever since. It gave me a real appreciation for the dynamic energy of live theater. It's something I've never experienced before. Okay, I said earlier that there were some projects I did specifically as photography projects. After 9/11, as soon as I could get a plane down, I went down to New York City. You couldn't get near the site, so I took pictures of something else. What we're seeing here is the Twin Towers, and they're made of those little name license plates you get in highway gas stations. You know, Shirley, Bob, Charlie. So every one of those has a name, and somebody built it. This is West 14th Street. So I couldn't get to the site. I tried. So what I did instead was I went around town. I walked all over Lower Manhattan, and I took hundreds of pictures of the missing persons posters that people had put up. You can see inside that phone booth, somebody put up a torn off calendar page for September 11th, a sign saying need prayer, missing persons sign on it, and a thing saying soon across the street. I have no idea what that's about. I saw this woman in that green shirt all over Lower Manhattan. There were shrines all over the place. Sibling survivors of terrorism. This a couple weeks later, so support groups had started growing up. None of these people, by the way, was ever found. Everybody who was lost that first day was gone. So these pictures represent kind of the last surviving presence. These families desperately hoping someone will turn up. Another thing I did was I went down to, I went 4 times to the northern Chihuahuan desert photographing. And I'm not done with that yet. Donald Trump's gift to the American landscape. A Prada store outside of Marfa, Texas, in case you need shoes. A car in case you ever want to be driven around town. This was at a refugee center right next to a federal detention camp. The people in the federal detention camp, that blue building, didn't know that the refugees were in this building right behind it. This is standing right in the middle of the Rio Grande River. It's Texas on the right, Mexico on the left. I left my mark in the middle so you'd know where the international border was. Another project that I deliberately did was Buffalo has a bunch of grain elevators, a residue of the 19th century when Buffalo was the busiest grain port in the world. And I spent about 3 years doing these things. We're a northern city, so the light changes here radically with the time of year and the time of day. So the shadows and the color of these elevators was always changing. And this came out as a book from SUNY Press called American Chart. You can't see it in this small image, but just to the left of the left side railroad track, there are some deer in that high grass. They would come out every time one of those things offloaded and grain spat out. They would just come out of the weeds. We had our first contrail in the sky here at Buffalo. Diane and I noticed yesterday that we've seen since COVID started. It was really startling, and it reminded me of right after 9/11, because there was no airplane traffic for about 2 weeks after that. And I remember being out back one night, and a plane went over, and I started crying. This is inside the elevators. And in the lower right is my dog, which Tom Rankin knows, a story which we won't tell you tonight, involving Bill Ferris, that is of epic proportions. This is my favorite graffito. Fuck more and keep door closed. I mean, you know, which injunction am I to adopt? I said a lot of my photographs are hanging out, and a lot of them are simply my old friends. This is Frederick Wiseman. Fred's a documentary filmmaker. Pete Seeger, Diane and I were visiting one time when he was boiling down maple syrup. This is poet Robert Creeley and Lawrence Ferlinghetti. Lawrence turned 100 last month. Walker Evans, photographer. Mike Seeger, Pete's brother, and our dog. Allen Ginsberg. Chuck Schumer, several years ago, looking much less harried. Betty Friedan, looking at that salad as if she's really going to give it an inquisition. Nick Blagona, who's one of the great board men, he did Chicago and a number of those other groups, and Ian Gillan, who's the lead singer for Deep Purple. If you ever heard Smoke on the Water or songs like that, that's Ian. 1964, that same trip I told you about when I went to Texas the first time, I met somebody in Saltville, Virginia, who gave me that 12-string guitar. I stopped in a gas station to get an oil change. And this cop came over and he saw this guitar. He said, "What's that in the back of your car?" I said, "It's a guitar." And he said, "Can I try it?" And I said, "If I can take your picture while you're playing it." He said, "Okay." So he played it and I took his picture. He turned out, his name was Ron Holmes, turned out to be a really sweet guy. He invited me to his family's house that Sunday. Turned out he, his dad, his two brothers got together every Sunday and they played fiddle guitars and they sang for hours. It was one of my favorite family hoots ever. Now this is a goat farmer I met somewhere in North Carolina. And maybe somebody later can help me identify this guy. This is Diane. As Susan said before, I've been taking pictures of Diane for a long time. I have thousands of pictures of Diane like that. I could do a whole book of Diane, but sometimes I got through, and after a while she gave up. And a few years ago, it turned out, I just realized that those pictures, in a way, told the story of our relationship. So I strung some together. This in London, pub in London, I think. This is her with the painter Bryce Marden. This was Diane with me one time in the Texas Penitentiary. That's the way she dressed in the Texas Penitentiary. Arkansas. Yeah, three of those aren't spikes, those are pumps. But she was very popular in the penitentiary. The guys really liked it when Diane kept me company. And the mules in this picture seem to. This is visiting our friend Bill and Margie Kunstler. Bill was a civil rights lawyer in New York. This is Diane in London, one of my favorite looks. This is Diane with our friend Michel Foucault. Now, I told you before we were going to come back to this picture. This was at an exhibit of my photographs in Paris in 1975. And Michel had made us dinner at his house. And then the next day we came to this show. And he went over to this picture and he stared at it and stared at it. And I looked at him next to that picture. I had a camera with me and I knew what he was thinking, that it was, if I ever get really fucked up, this is what I'm going to look like. Because Michel was a really neat, he was very, you can look, he was a really precise guy. His apartment was,
Fastidious.
what was the word?
Fastidious.
fastidious, yes. It was, and he was the first of our friends who died of AIDS. Several years later, he got AIDS, and at the end, a friend of ours who worked in the hospital he was in, La Salpêtrière in Paris, gave us reports on his progress, and that's what happened to Michel. Some things happened, they just dropped into my life. I was going to do this, a motorcycle gang in Buffalo was getting harassed by a local narcotics cop named Mike Amico, and they wanted me to write an article about the harassment. And I said, okay. But before I got to do it, the president of the club got murdered. So I went to the funeral. This was at the clubhouse, the Road Vultures. Well, 30 years later, their newest president died. And they called me up and they say, Bruce, you're the guy who takes our president's funerals photos. Will you come and do this funeral? So I went and I did that funeral. The guys had gotten a little older in the interim, as had I. Now, Susan mentioned before that some of the stuff is events I went on to. This is the October 21st, 1967 march in Washington. It was the first major anti-war march. This is the Pentagon. This is a little while after the Yippies tried to levitate it unsuccessfully, I might add. This is on the Pentagon porch. How I wound up there, I don't know. This is one of my favorite photos from that day. And I learned a lesson from it. My light meter said it was too dark to take pictures. And I shot 3 frames anyway. 2 of them are crappy. This one came out. And it really gives the feeling of being in that place at that time. This is Resurrection City, another one where I was doing something else. A guy named Ralph Rinsler, Alan Lomax, and I were working with the people doing Resurrection City, Southern Christian Leadership Conference, in setting up a music program there. And so I took some photographs while we were there. That's Alan Lomax and Reverend Frederick Douglass Kirkpatrick on their way to do a performance. There's Kirk. These are some kids. It was the night of the first town meeting at Resurrection City. I think there were 5 white guys in that tent because everybody else hadn't arrived yet. And it had just great energy. I loved it. Finally, this is the last 3 photographs. These are the last 3 photographs. I said a lot of the photographs I did when we were doing something else. Diane and I have a practice in the warm months of going out back and having martinis on the patio. And I noticed several years ago that as the sun sank to the west across our driveway, the daylilies along the fence would light up as if someone had poured liquid gold into them. With each flower, it would last maybe 30 seconds because the sun would move just a little bit. Sometime it would be the sun would move, sometime it would move behind a leaf in my neighbor's oak tree through which it was peeking, and it would go out. So I took to just, when we went out there, just bringing a camera with me, and every so often I would leap up, run over, capture a flower, and then come back. When we had company over who didn't know about this, they thought I'd gone quite wacko. But some of the flowers are just, I don't know what I'm going to do with them. And of that group, this is one of my favorites because being 84 years old, this is a flower that has in the background a flower in full bloom. Running throughout it, it has buds that ain't flowers yet. And it has one tired, poor old desiccated son of a bitch in the foreground that is just through for the day. And that is the last one I'm going to show you. Let's see here. To exit.
How do we applaud on this thing?
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, that's true. We can do
Okay.
this.
Okay, I'm going to go. Thanks. I'm going to go full screen now. Hi, folks.
Well, I would love to welcome anyone that has questions. You can type them if you don't want to talk, or you can unmute yourself, and we'll just, if we have a thing where everybody starts talking on top of each other, we'll go to a different system. But let's, anybody have any questions they would like to ask?
Thank you, Barry.
Bruce, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Who's talking?
Sandy.
Oh, hi there, Sandy.
Hi, Bruce. Do you know what you make me feel like when you're showing me the pictures of the prisons and the people there? I was a VA nurse for 9 years, and I dealt with the World War II patients, and it wasn't so much medical, it was more neuropsychiatric, but there was so much history there. There was so much humanism and that contact that it was important for me. That changed my life. I thought it was really important. And when I'm watching the pictures that you're posting of the guys in prison, it's like these are human beings. We're all human.
Important you say that. I mentioned before that Diane and I had done this book and film about death row. Several times when we've shown the death row film, people have said to us afterwards, but they look like anybody else. You know, what did you want? Fangs? You know, they are like, yeah. They're people. They're people.
We are all the same. I really believe we're all the same.
Could I ask a question?
Hi, Leslie.
Hi, and happy birthday.
Thank you.
Happy birthday, Bruce.
Thank you.
Could you please speak, Bruce, to what it was like photographing from inside the cell? It was somewhat surprising to see the access that you had, but what was it like inside, you know, speaking of point of view, as opposed to perhaps the shots that were on the other side of the bar, and how did your relationship, the dynamic between you as photographer and the prisoners being photographed, how did that sort of emerge and shift at different moments of your project?
And that's a question it would take far more time than I have here to answer, but I can do parts of it. On death row, before we went down, I wrote everybody that I was coming down. Diane said, bring some of your books to show them. I said, I'm not going to do that. I don't do that showing off. She said, no, bring them. So I did. And the first night, I left 2 of my books, I think. One photograph book. I don't remember what books. I think maybe Killing Time and then something else. There were 3 tiers in death row. I left it in the first cell of the 3rd tier. When I came back the next morning, the guy on the far cell on the bottom tier gave them to me. They had literally done that through the night, and that helped. There were a few people who didn't want to be photographed or filmed because their cases were pending. They just didn't want publicity. Almost everybody else did talk to us, in part because prison is an exquisitely boring place and we were entertainment. I mean, it was somebody else to talk about. Nobody, you know, in the penitentiary, who listens to you complain that you're in the penitentiary? Everybody's there. Well, I would listen. Diane would listen. So that helped too. There was only one guy whose cell I didn't go into. And that was that guy at the end who I told you was poetry, Brandon, Follett Brandon. And that was only because on the 2nd day, he smashed a glass against the bars of the cell of a friend of his. And what you do, it was a coffee jar. That's the way you blind somebody in penitentiary. You smash the glass and it explodes and the shards go into somebody's eyes unless you're wearing glasses. So I said to him later, I said, Brandon, why did you try to blind Donnie? He said, I didn't want to blind Donnie. I wanted to blind Wolf. I said, well, Wolf's in the next cell. He said, I know that. I said, why did you try to blind Donnie? He said, Bruce, I don't know. I just don't know. At that point, I decided I am never going into this man's cell because he didn't know. And I really liked it. We talked all the time, but I never went into his cell. But the rest of it, it was, I think anybody who's photographed in a situation of physical danger knows this. You just suspend everything. You just forget about it. I mean, you just go do it. And so while there, I literally never thought anything about going in or out. And part of it because I wasn't thinking about it, nobody else did either. There was no point grabbing me in the penitentiary, by the way, because Texas and Arkansas both had a very strong no hostage exchange rule, which everybody knew. So I felt that protected me. But also, just as I said, when you're doing it, you're just in it. And I suspended, not consciously, I just suspended everything. I was talking, as Sandy said, I was talking to people, and people were talking to me. So occasionally people would talk about being in the cell, and you saw in some of those photographs, sometimes I was in the cell with the cell door open, sometimes with the cell door closed. But it was just part of being there. Interesting. I'll tell you one short anecdote. When I went to Arkansas, I did my work in Texas, my initial work, 63 to 67. The Arkansas was 61 to 65. Made 8 trips to Arkansas. 71 to 75. That's Diane over here correcting me. And 71 to 75. And I think on my first trip, end of my first trip, guy comes over to me and says, I bet you're wondering why people are talking to you. Actually, I wasn't, but I said, yeah, I am. I wonder why they're talking to me. He said, I told them you were all right. I said, how do you know I'm all right? He said, I was on Ellis Prison when you were there in 1966. And I know some people told you things that they could have gotten in a lot of trouble for. Nobody got in trouble, so I know you're not a snitch. So I told people here, talk to that guy, he's all right. So things like that happened. So
Bruce, Bruce, we have just a couple of questions that people have posted that I thought I would. Diane asked, do you think anyone could get access to the prisons today the way you did?
Excellent question. When several years ago, as Alexa knows and Tom knows, Diane and I did a book through University of North Carolina Press and the Center for Documentary Studies about capital punishment in America now. And we tried to get permission to visit death row in Texas. And when Texas did that book of my photographs a few years later, I tried to get permission to visit Texas again. We could not get an answer to our telephone calls, emails, nothing. And we had people who would call up, like retired wardens, retired associate directors, say, look, this guy's not going to, he's not a scandal monger. He's not going to screw you over. Let him in. Nothing. The work I did in those years, I think impossible now. I absolutely lucked out at the time. It all started, I wrote the director of the Texas prison system. I was at Harvard, I was a junior fellow, which had some status in the academic world. The director of the Texas prison system, a guy named George Beto, was a former college president. He knew what a Harvard fellow was. So he invited me down and he gave me carte blanche to the place. And the reason I had carte blanche in Arkansas was because I'd previously had it in Texas. It continued. But subsequent to that, I don't know, and Danny Lyons, some of you know Danny Lyons' work in Texas. I got Danny into Texas because I said to Dr. Beto, I said, let this guy in, he's a good guy. But none of us could do that now. Absolutely impossible. I couldn't photograph in a police station now.
Does anybody have questions they want to ask? I can keep working off this list, but if folks are here live that want to ask a
Well, I want to
question,
say,
feel free to.
before you do that,
Okay.
the goat herd I lifted before, if he's on your screen, you can see Tom Rankin right under that goat.
Yeah. I don't have a question. Can I talk without a question?
You most certainly can.
So I met Bruce in 1980. Bruce wouldn't remember because I was like a early 20s graduate student in folklore, unsure that I wanted to be in folklore. And I went to the American Folklore Society conference in Pittsburgh, and Bruce and Diane were showing Death Row.
Oh.
And I sat through that screening and the discussion afterwards and thought, maybe I can be a folklorist. These two people are actually doing things that are relevant, and they're not talking about theory, and they're connected to universities, but they actually seem to be connected to the world. And that was my first Bruce Jackson experience. And I don't want to, I could go on longer. More Bruce Jackson experience.
Bruce is like, please.
And at that time I had read Wake Up Dead Man and listened to the recordings, and and I have always said to Bruce, the best title in in publishing in the last 300 years is Get Your Ass in the Water and Swim Like Me. And so there was a way in which, after looking at what Bruce had done and hearing he and Diane talk, I just wanted to get in the water and swim like this guy. Mm-hmm. And the fact to listen tonight to you talking about photographing, I can't help but think of James Agee's line in Let Us Not Praise Famous Men, where he says words and pictures will be co-equal. And in that book, they attempt to do it, but Bruce, you actually do it as a career. I mean, your writing is you could have just written and you could still have a Zoom evening.
Yeah.
you could just have photographed and you'd have a Zoom evening. There is a kind of level quality to both of them, exceptional quality to both of them. And you see that in that book we published at the center, In This Timeless Time, that you talked about. And I think that also became a model for so many of us who didn't want to be, have to choose one medium or the other, or have to go in one door and not the other. That whole notion of the co-equality of voice. So I just, I could go on, and I could go on, but it's your birthday.
BK?
Can you still hear me? Am I still there?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So
something. Yeah.
That's Diane.
Hi. I
So
can't leave my.
there's a way that, and I'll refer to another one of your somebody you've read and thought about a lot. You could be 84 and people could say, well, he's endured, but as Faulkner said, endure, but you'd rather prevail. There's a way in which Bruce Jackson just keeps prevailing and doing, he keeps swimming, he keeps going. And that too is the ultimate model. You're not that flower in that last picture.
I'm the butt, man.
So I just, happy birthday. If I could hand you a martini, I would. And I know you'd take it.
I would. As soon as we're done here, I'm going to have one. But I want to share it with the kids gave me for a birthday present.
Okay.
And we've got Kate here as well, raising her hand. Kate.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
I just want to say.
Oh, hi, Kate.
Hey, hi. Hi, Bruce. Hi, Diane.
Hi.
I so enjoyed this evening so much. It was wonderful to see those photographs. Thank you for that. And to hear the stories behind the photographs. I just was enthralled. Thank you so much. And
Tell them to come by if you can.
And I just want to let you know, in this, quarantine, Eric Berryman and I have started working on Get Your Ass in the Water and Swim Like Me. So we've had 2 Zoom rehearsals and we're working on it for this little small screen. So love you, Bruce. Love you so much. And what a gift. Thank you.
Love you, Kate.
Yes.
Thanks, Annie.
I want to say something nice about Tom Rankin. I've heard Bruce introduced all over the world, including the Collège de France and very, very smart Frenchies, and people have said very nice things. But as far as I'm concerned, the finest, most accurate introduction he ever got was by Tom Rankin, who very modestly, as is his style, hit all the right notes and registers.
Yeah, Tom gives great introductions. But I want to finish by saying my kids gave me a first edition of Let Us Now Praise Famous Men for my birthday.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that cool?
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you, Diane. And I only give great introductions to Bruce. The rest of it.
So, anything else?
Yeah, so we had, let's see, there was one other question. Oh, well, it was a comment. Fire said the parallel lives lost on death row and those lost among the missing of 9/11 is striking. So there was something about seeing your images together, shown together in that way. That was, did I capture that correctly?
Yeah, their lives gratuitously lost that served no and ruined many lives in the course of their happening. Because for every life lost in death row, as the lives lost right now to coronavirus, it's not the individual, it's the ripples that go through everybody else's life. The body count is far more than 93,000.
Right.
Way above.
We had a couple other people write in. I'll see if they're still here. Jonathan Golov, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right.
You are.
Yeah, if you don't mind sharing some of the stuff you had sent. We sent out a request for folks to share, and so we appreciate that Jonathan sent in something. Would you like to share, Jonathan?
Sure. Thank you, Bruce. That was a wonderful display of such a wide variety of incredible work, and hearing the background, some of which I have heard, but much of which I hadn't, is just, such a great and stimulating thing. And what I had wanted to say was just a big thank you, because I'm at the University of Buffalo with Bruce, but I'm in the music department. And I met Bruce, I think, for the first time when he kind of out of the blue invited me to give a guest lecture in a class he was doing almost 20 years ago. And he wanted me to talk about music to his class, but it turned out that his own experiences with music and musicians were things that I have repeated to classes that I have over the years very often. So it was really just a thank you for the generosity that you have always showed, I think, to your younger colleagues, and I'm sure that goes to your students as well. And not treating us folks who are starting out or at earlier stages like they oughtn't to be taken seriously. That's just been it's been a great privilege to know you, and Diane, of course, as well.
Well, I want to tell you all about something about what Jonathan did. Jonathan plays many instruments, theremin, cello, composes. He did a performance of a cage piece in those grain elevators I showed you before, with a vocalist and a percussionist. It was the three of you. It was you on cello. And the vocalist moved around, and in those tall towers, it has different hang time depending how far you are from the perimeter. And so this guy would move into the circle and out, he'd move to the next one. So his voice is echoing. John is playing harmony with himself, because the note he plays here is still in the air 4 seconds later. It was one of the most incredible performances. I mean, something that one of those things you really had to be there.
It's true. I've never been involved in a Cage performance that people are still talking about like this many years later. Thank you, Bruce.
Is Richard Zotara, is he still online?
Yes, I am.
Hey, do you want to? Yes.
Yes, my comment was that I met Bruce through the Buffalo Film Seminar, and I felt one of my regrets in life was that I didn't start out years ago at the Market Arcade Theater. I only came lately at the Amherst Theater, and just have enjoyed Bruce and Diane's commentaries and the question and answers afterwards. And I always appreciated, Bruce, your emailing me my replies for the questions and comments I see you after the week. So thank you for that, and happy birthday. Wow, 84, that's incredible. You look great. I loved your photographs, another side of it I am just coming to know about. So thank you for tonight.
Thank you. And I'm
we
happy
have,
in case that we got another production coming on. I'm very excited about this, honey.
yes. We have a request from Sarah Elder, and it looks like, oh, a question for Bruce. So does John Flitt. Yeah.
I noticed my colleague was trying to raise his hand there.
Okay.
I don't know if he's still on.
Yeah.
Is he John there? I'll ask my question. This is a little bit different. Well, first of all, Bruce has come to many of my documentary filmmaking classes.
I'm muted now so I can talk, right?
And I think he needs to mute himself.
I did. I turned it on.
Oh, okay. So recently he Zoomed this, what was it, a month ago? And students just gave their feedback yesterday on their final exam. And many of them said, oh, that old guy was really the best. That old guy, I never knew that there was documentary like that. I always thought it was boring and educational and horrible, and it went on. And I was just wanted to mention, this happens every time Bruce comes to classes. He really opens students to this new world of documentary, and they're just astonished by it. I was just reading these last night. But my question for Bruce is, it's kind of a question I think most artists think about it. You don't have to be a photographer. But I wonder, Bruce, in the long career that you've had, when you're sort of thinking, something triggers a memory, I find for myself often my certain shots or certain times of being there in the experience of filming is equal or more powerful than the act of reality. So my film and the scene will, if you had a picture of my brain, they're sort of very equal, whereas some people think reality is, has some kind of power more than our art. Can you think of certain shots that, do you see a frame or a pattern, or somebody has a turn of phrase or something, and all of a sudden your images come to you and there's sort of this incredible duet between photos you've made, places you've been, and also what's happening in the present moment?
I don't know. One of the reasons, Sarah, I find that hard to answer is, as I mentioned before, we've had this scanning project going on recently for the last year, and scanned about 17,000 images, some of which I've forgotten totally. Found 450 photographs, 850 photographs from a trip to Mexico in 1970. Just most of it 6x6 stuff, gorgeous stuff. And I don't know if I remember the trip to Mexico or if I remember the photographs I've just looked at. So sometimes it is really hard for me to distinguish the two. Often I look at pictures and something comes into focus that I experience, because the thing is, in the moment, nothing has any meaning. I mean, life is always understood in the past anyway. You know that Kierkegaard line, like life is understood backwards, it must be lived forwards. So the further things get, the different kind of coherence it takes on. One of the things, this exercise that Susan got me to do, that we did today, is to revisit a lot of this stuff in a way I ordinarily would not. I ordinarily would work on one thing. I'm doing this. Somebody writes me and asks me, can I use some of your pictures for a film? Can I use some of your pictures for a book? I'll go fetch them, or I'll pick out the ones they want. Look at, and occasionally I will discover pictures that I have never seen before. Pictures that I have gone over. Tom, you must have had this experience, where you look over old negatives that you've seen before, and all of a sudden one is, well, that's a good picture. And I just, where did it come from? Well, one thing is, it's a different Bruce than it was when I last visited 10, 15 years ago. So there's a separate reality. I'm not sure this is answering your question. There's a separate reality that the images have, that each time I come back to address them.
Thank you for making this mine. It's lovely.
Who's that? But each time I come back to them, it's a different configuration, and I see different things. I'll give you one example. For years, I told you I had no photographic training or education, and so I thought sharpness was everything. Well, a few years ago, it occurred to me that blur can be pretty good too. So there are some images I have now that are blurrier and shit, and I love them, which I wouldn't have touched before, because I feel the blur gives a sense of the motion, the immediacy of the moment, because an absolutely frozen photograph gives no sense of motion or velocity whatsoever. So it's always changing for me. It's always different. And the moment is the moment. Understanding always comes later. But it also is predicated on what question I'm asking of that historical moment.
Bruce, this is Tom.
Hi, Tom.
Hey, can you talk a little bit about, I mean, you're sitting on an archive. I mean, you just mentioned, you made reference to like working your archive. And this work is going to go to an archive. How do you see this work, not in the past, but in the future, in the far future? Sort of, what do you think about your work as a, I'm using archive to mean, sort of, they call it the perpetual care cemetery, the perpetual care Bruce Jackson archive.
That's a good question. And of course, at my age, it's something that concerns me. Not just at my age, but now that I realize I've created a body of stuff that really is of interest to other people in ways that I cannot at the moment appreciate. Last year was the 50th anniversary of Resurrection City. There are a number of events where some of the photographs you saw tonight and others figured. There'll be other events of that sort where I was bearing witness, where those things will be useful. All of my stuff is going to the Library of Congress. A whole lot has gone there already. And we're talking now about the photographs. And one of the reasons we're doing the scanning project is so that I can identify in my PowerPoint files who and what is on those negatives, and create master, not PowerPoint, Lightroom files. And I can create master sets of things and say, this is the way I want that image to look, because as far as I'm concerned, a negative is just a theory for a picture. It's like a piece of sheet music. It's or a script for a play. It's nothing until it's performed. It's the print where it's performed. So I'm really working on that very issue right now, Tom, and trying to figure out ways to do it so that it will be accessible, and some of my sense of what is there will continue, but it'll be accessible in a way that other people can make use of it in terms that make sense in terms of what they're doing. Because a lot of it, like the prison stuff, is of far more interest than me.
Right.
Yeah, it is just, I mean, that is historical stuff that, you know, Danny did his book, Leonard Freed did some, there were only about 5 of us who photographed in those prisons. And I did a lot. I mean, it's a lot of stuff, and people can make, it's historical. So, that's an important issue for me, and I'm working.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Bruce, this is John Fiege. Can I ask a
Hi,
question?
John. Yeah.
How's it going? So, you know, obviously your work has an incredible breadth, you know, from filmmaking to photography to writing to theater. You talk about, you know, Foucault and Ginsberg and Pete Seeger, et cetera. And it just makes me think how institutions have changed so dramatically over your lifetime. And I was just wondering if you could reflect a little bit on what it's been like to jump around to all these different areas and how that's really discouraged in the world that we inhabit now. And whether you feel like, you know, there's something anemic now about this world of high specialization where you either take photographs or you write or you do plays, but you never, you know, go outside your wheelhouse, as people like to say now. And there's this intellectual breadth to all your work that I think makes, like, just what you're saying about photographing in the prisons, you're not trying to create a certain image, you're just relaying your experience of being there. And I feel like if you were coming at it from simply a photography perspective, you wouldn't have come to that. So I'm just curious as to your thoughts about how the world has changed since then and what you see.
That's a very good question, John. And I think your perception is right. I don't think the university where I now work would hire me now. Certainly the English department in which I teach would have no interest in someone like me now. I was fortunate in that before I came to Buffalo, I had a 4-year grant at Harvard, the Society of Fellows, that I could do whatever I wanted. Literally, I had no reports. If I wanted to do something, I said, I need this money, and they gave me money. It was like being a rich kid, or it was like a young person's MacArthur, where I could just follow. I could fail. And one of the hardest things, particularly for younger people, graduate students and younger faculty, is failing. You can't take big risks. You can't go down a road you don't know is going anywhere, because tenure's coming up, job is coming up, something's coming up, and you're going to get shit canned if you don't have a product that they approve of at the end. So I had this 4-year thing where I could just follow my curiosity. And when I got hired at Buffalo, it just happened to be the kind of department that cherished that. And my deal when I came to Buffalo, that was, I had job offers the same year. It was a totally different academic world. I had job offers from Penn, UCLA, and MIT. And they all wanted to put me in a program, a department. Buffalo said, we're hiring you in English, but you can teach whatever you want. Whatever department wants you, you can teach. And since I've been here, as Sarah knows, I've taught in media study, I've taught in architecture, I've taught in sociology, I've taught in the law school, I've taught in the art department, I've taught in the library school. So Buffalo let me do that. And by the time the university got so tight-assed, I'd been doing it so long they didn't know how to stop. So I can still get away with it. I think it would be really hard for you to do it. So I think that world has changed.
But part of the time you felt like a freak.
Diane says part of the time I felt like a freak. Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
I did. But I was lucky. I was really lucky because that, as I said, by the time I got here, my first job, starting out as an assistant professor, I had 2 records and 3 books out. So in the academic world, nobody's going to fuck with me. And no one has. And I keep doing it. So, but it's rare. It's rare. The university has gotten very square and uptight as far as I'm concerned.
I was just going to make a remark. I find that transdisciplinary, it's a catchword, or interdisciplinary, is something that seems to be promoted at the same time. I agree with what you say about Buffalo being a really special place when you join the ranks. I wonder if you could remark on that notion of the trend towards interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary studies.
Well, no, I want to say something further to John's question. In that, John, I have never felt myself really being a photographer or being a writer. I have always been interested in something. I mean, something got my interest and I went after it. So, and I use these things, the way a cook uses things, because they fit, they work. And, sometimes it's photographs, sometimes it's a recording machine for sound, sometimes it's, I drew. I have one book I'm working on, it's old drawings. It's what works. So I've always followed the subject rather than the discipline. And I was lucky and I was able to do that. And Leslie, your question about the interdisciplinary, I don't know, because the departments I'm in have gotten so heavily grounded in theory these days. I wanted to teach a course a few years ago in the English department in Faulkner and Agee. And they said, we're not interested in author-based courses anymore. Well, I felt like a creature from another century, but I am. So.
But Bruce, this is Tom. You said something a minute ago that I think is an important element in you getting by, and in other people maybe being able to. You have always done stuff. You've finished stuff. You showed up with 3 books and 2 records. That's not inconsequential. And then there were more books, and if you stand around and talk about what you're going to do, and you never do it, it's hard to get any kind of purchase in the world. But you're the opposite of that. And so I would there's some footnote that should go there, interdisciplinarity, all this stuff. And I talk about it at Duke, but in the end of the day, if you deliver the mail, they'll hire a mail carrier.
So you put on my tombstone, he finished.
Yeah. I think that, just a quick thing, I think that is a perfect opportunity to mention next week's talk, which we are going to take a deeper dive into the creative process and particularly into collaborative processes with both Bruce and Diane. So I would encourage those of you on the call to return, or in the webinar to return next week. We had a couple of other folks. Is Kathleen Kennedy still here? Some folks may be leaving. She had a little note. And Ray, am I saying the name right, Ray? Let me just look on the list and see if she's still here.
Let me check those other screens.
Rhea, maybe. R-E-A. That's a friend of yours, Bruce, right?
That's Ray Mulestock.
Yes. She may have already had to jump. So while we're all here, we'll keep going as long as people want to hang out and as long as Bruce has energy for it, but he does have a piece of cake. And I thought it would be fun while some of us are still here to sing happy birthday.
Susan sent me a huge cake today. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Wow, that's beautiful.
Happy birthday
to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Bruce. Happy birthday to you.
Yay.
Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Birthday.
And so we see you next week. Where are we?
Yeah, so just want to check if anybody had any closing questions or thoughts that they might want to toss out. I think I feel like Tom hit on this really important and central issue, which is also, it's not, while you are multidisciplinary, you are also prolific And I think there's something that I'm so curious about, and we'll get into next week, about, you know, what fuels a creative life in that sense, the curiosity. And one of the things that has emerged the most in the comments that people have been saying and the stuff that people have been sending me is this, the word generosity emerges in almost all of the comments. And I have a feeling that that spirit of generosity is similar to the spirit of curiosity that fuels your movement out into the world as a creative person. And so I look forward to hearing more about that as well.
I want to say one little thing about that. Very early in our relationship, I was doing something, and I was, you know, and I said to Diane, I got to finish this. I got to get it out. And she said a line that stuck with me. She said, "Boy, your mother sure wound you up." And if you knew my mother, that line fits. Yeah.
But the other part of that I was going to say is, go ahead, Bruce.
Well, Tom, one important thing that we haven't mentioned here, you know, I've been doing the Harvard stuff, but growing up, lower class, working class Jewish family in Brooklyn, in New York, in my years, roaming the city. I was all over the city at 10, 11, and 12 years old, as kids of my generation were. It was not like now. So it created a sense of freedom of inquiry, I think, that carried over into the stuff we're talking about now. The world was something very early on for me to be explored and looked at. Mm-hmm. And I lived in a place that, you know, in New York. I started going to MoMA, Museum of Modern Art, on my own every Saturday when I was 12 years old.
Wow.
That's where I learned about photography, was looking at pictures at MoMA.
What I was going to say, you just mentioned well, a number of times, but just a second ago you quoted Diane, and she's outside the frame right now. And you showed some pictures where she was in the frame, but there's, I mean, I think I've known you for 40 years, but Diane's known you for way more than that, and the influence there is, that'll be interesting to hear next week, because I think, you know, and Diane knows, that influence is not always visible in the frame, but it's always there.
Yeah, I mean, we collaborate all the time, even when we're not.
Well, that's a kind of collaboration too, Bruce.
I mean, it's part of the environment. Hi, Rachel.
Hi, Dad.
Oh, no, there were two Rachels. There's Rachel in the Northwest and Rachel above. That's my daughter, Rachel. There. Hi, Rachel. She's the one who came by with that first edition of Let Us Now Praise Famous Men. For those of you who don't know, I have a very special interest. I held it up before with that book. It is one of the formative books in my imagination. As Tom knows, I love teaching it, and folk. I think the two greatest prose works, maybe American 20th century, are Absalom, and Let Us Now Praise Famous Men. I wrote the introduction to the primary French edition of Let Us Now Praise Famous Men. I'm never fortunate enough to have met A.G., but I was lucky enough to meet Evans, as you know, from that photograph. So this stuff was really important to me. So thank you, Rachel. That was a real treat. It brought tears to my eyes. I don't know if you saw it.
I did. It brought tears to our eyes too when we saw your tears through the glass.
They're all out there with, you know, wearing, two grandchildren. Rachel and her husband were all wearing masks, handing me this box.
It's from Michael too. He's also.
Yeah. And Michael and Jessica.
There they are.
Happy birthday, Dad.
Thank you. Hi, Jess.
Hi.
My other daughter, Jessica. Who's Michael?
He's on the next screen.
I'm here. Happy birthday.
Hi, Michael.
There he is.
Oh, my son.
Hi.
Michael's in LA. Jesse's in New Jersey. The whole family's here. Thanks for the treats, kids. So.
You're a hard one to buy for.
This is true. My clothing, my wardrobe, I have a few shirts, but basically it's t-shirts and jeans. That's it. You can't buy me clothes. And occasionally they buy me a single more expensive than I buy for myself. But that gets tiresome. So this was really a perfect gift. You nailed it. You nailed it. So now, is it martini time in Jacksonville? I think it's martini time in Jacksonville.
Martini time. Yay! Happy birthday.
So thank you all.
Thank you.
Happy birthday, Bruce.
Happy birthday, Bruce.
Good night, Bruce.
I love, I'll talk to you anon, Kate V. Kate?
Yes, happy birthday. Talk to you soon. Love you.
Happy birthday, Bruce.
Bye, everybody. Happy
birthday.
Happy birthday. Bye now.
Great.
Bye, Leslie. Bye, John. Great. Bye, Swanee Jim. Bye. Nancy Gross was on. Wow.
Yes, I am. I'm off. Bye.
Okay. Thanks a lot, everybody. It was great fun. Thanks. Bye-bye. And thank you, Susan, for doing this. It was really useful for me to look through this stuff and formulate what I did tonight. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it was so lovely having you here. Appreciate you so much.
Thanks for the cake.
And I'm looking forward to next week. So I look forward to seeing y'all who can come back and join us again.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.